said something some years ago that we in the South have always known to be true, and that is there's a great big difference between being naked and being naked. Being naked means you have no clothes on. Being naked means you have no clothes on and you are up to something. Well, I'll leave any image of Nader naked to your own imagination. But the naked truth is that Ralph is always coming up with something, including this great democracy rally. Ralph Nader.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Jim Hightower, and greetings to all of you here and those watching around the country through live streaming. Thanks to the Real News Network out of Baltimore, Maryland. This is indeed the largest gathering of accomplished citizen advocacy groups covering more issues, redirections, and reforms ever brought together under one roof. Most conferences are focused on single important issues, but we thought that it would be important to demonstrate one speaker after another what is involved in building the civic community, the civil society. It was in many ways a demonstration that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We all know that problems and injustices in society are all connected to one another, even though they may be treated in a specialized way. But what's important to focus on is how did these groups accomplish what they accomplished? That's why we asked them to talk about their accomplishments. Citizen groups are not very good at celebrations. They will celebrate the 20th, 30th, or 40th, or 50th anniversary, but they're so busy doing their work that they can't compare it to the celebrations in the sports arena, in the entertainment arena, in the political arena, many of which are always covered by the mass media. But this is more than a celebration. It's an elaboration forward to the next 50 years and to shape the kind of much, much stronger civil society that's needed in terms of resources, in terms of education, in terms of grassroots mobilization, in terms of redefining leadership so that it becomes a force that produces more leaders and not just more followers. But the occasion is the 50th anniversary year of Unsafe at Any Speed. And the occasion is an opportunity to very briefly look backward and see what it was like in the early 60s here in Washington, D.C. It was pretty barren territory for citizen groups. The lobbies were here. They weren't as great as they are now in terms of number and staff, but they were pretty much all over Capitol Hill and all over the various agencies. I remember when I was going up to one office after another, in the Senate and the House, I could see that there was a pall over anything that was called consumer protection or environmental protection or worker protection. Senator Magnuson, the chair of the powerful Senate Commerce Committee, was considered the business agent on Capitol Hill for all kinds of industries and commerce. I remember trying to call Senate offices, and they would always ask, "Who are you with?" I would call agencies, and they would always say, "Who are you with?" And I'd sort of look around, and say, "Who am I with?" I'm a citizen. One time I was in a parking lot, and I made a call to a senator's office to talk to his staffer, and the receptionist said, "Who are you with?" Luckily, there was a dog that yapped right into the phone, and I heard a click. I guess they weren't amused. But we persisted, and we developed the critical quadrangle of civic success in Washington, D.C. The first is full-time advocates pressing for the change. The second is a reception to public hearings in the House and Senate by the critical chairs. The third is open-mindedness in the White House, not knee-jerk vetoism. And the fourth is the mass media. The mass media, not just reporting, but reflecting and communicating the public sentiment, or to use Abraham Lincoln's words, the public sentiment, or what we say today is majority opinion. So when you have majority opinion and you have a receptive Congress and you have an open-minded White House and you have a media that looks at these issues as regular beats, not just occasional features seeking Pulitzer Prizes or other prizes, you have that critical quadrangle for success. And after the passage in 1966 of the Highway and Motor Vehicle Safety Laws, signed into law by Lyndon Johnson in September 1966, a little over 9 months after Unsafe at Any Speed came out. Imagine the kind of speed that occurred those days in Congress compared to now. After that, there was a profusion of civic activity. Citizen groups were started, others were expanded in the environmental, consumer, worker area, open government. A whole variety of citizen groups opened their doors, brought in young people, interns, brought in people of activity going back to the 1930s, as well as people who honed their skills for the first time in the critical task of seeking justice. I remember in particular the establishment of one agency after another, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the establishing the air and water pollution laws, the critical umbrella air and water pollution laws that continue to this day, and other laws. Guess who signed them? Richard Nixon. Why did Richard Nixon sign them? He didn't believe in them. He had flourishing introductions to them that were really terrific, and he signed one after another because he feared the rumble from the people coming out of the 60s. I might say he's the last Republican president to be afraid of liberals, I might add. And it was the rumble of the people reflecting majority sentiment that radiated toward this national capital and made him sign legislation that, given his ideological predilections, would have been very, very improbable otherwise. So the sequence was an aroused public directing its attention to the commercial interests, telling them they better restrain themselves, focusing on the existing law to elaborate it on political and government institutions, and getting through the media. The importance of the civil society is hard to exaggerate. Looking over American history, it's hard to see any major social justice movement that started from within government, or from within business, or from within any institution. It started in the hearts and minds of very few people. The people who started the abolition movement against slavery in the late 18th century, early 19th century. The people who started the women's suffrage movement, 6 women meeting in a farmhouse in upstate New York in the 1840s. The sit-down strikes by workers in Flint, Michigan and Warren, Michigan to start the United Auto Workers. Rosa Parks refusing to go to the rear of the bus in Montgomery, Alabama. to flash the latest stage of the civil rights movement. It all starts with a few people, and we should never be demoralized by forgetting that historical principle. It all starts with small communities, small groups. What's happened today is the commercialization of our elections, from the profit centers that the present presidential debates have offered to the commercial media like Fox and CNN and others who put on these debates and decided who's going to be in Tier 1 and Tier 2, imagine that, to the super PACs and the business of raising money in order to advance through our electoral process commercial values over civil values. The commercialization of these elections have reached a point in American history where they're off limits to democracy itself. They're off limits to democracy's civil community. The people who are the experts, movers, and shakers in our country, in these civil communities, in these citizen groups, some of which you will see today, are not asked for their participation. They're not asked for their expertise by the media or by the political consultants. When elections are off limits to democracy, a society is in real trouble. The importance of these groups reflect what can be called a civic personality. We've heard of an athletic personality, that athlete who has that nth degree to win. We've heard of the entrepreneurial personality to start new businesses where no one has tread before. But we don't often talk about the civic personality. People who you'll see on this stage throughout the day and day 2, 3, and 4 of this week, which we have called Breaking Through Power, but which also can be called a civic marathon. They have the features of a civic personality. They know how to separate truth from fiction. They know how to be resilient. They know how to repel discouragement. They know how to share credit. They know how to keep up to date on the information. They know how to have patience and long attention spans. They know how to have the short view and the long view. They know how to and like to teach young people who will be their successors. These and others, including a ever more refined strategic and tactical sense, represent a civic personality that no one is really born with. It's something that's learned. It can be taught in our schools, but it is not. It can be taught in terms of on-the-job training. It can be heralded as well. If we had a more rational society in terms of our definition of heroism, we would not only have a Hollywood Academy Awards, we would have a National Civic Achievement Academy Awards. And a lot of the people you'll see on this stage would be nominees for those awards. These are people who could have minimized themselves and continue successfully through life, materially. Instead, they chose to maximize themselves in the great quest for justice, which Senator Daniel Webster once called the great work of human beings on earth. What we have found in terms of the experience of these groups and others around the country is that 1% or less of the population in any congressional district or state legislative district organized and engaged in pursuing a change or a redirection or a reform and reflecting majority opinion is unstoppable. It doesn't matter how powerful corporations think they are, how indentured politicians think they are, it's an unstoppable force. Many of the groups today had far less than 1% organized throughout the country. supporting their efforts on Capitol Hill. That's something to think about, because we hear a lot about the other 1% that rules us, popularized by Occupy Wall Street. But I think it's time to talk about this 1%, that throughout history, it has taken less than 1% in terms of people rolling up their civic sleeves, spending a few hundred hours a year, raising necessary money for full-time staff, and pursuing the strategies for victory. When you look at what these groups have accomplished, I want to compare at the right time what these CEOs have been paid. The entire cumulative budget of all of these groups who will present their life's work before you today, and you'll only get a glimmer of their quality and the quality of their colleagues and what they're up against. The entire cumulative budget is less than the executive compensation of the CEO of Discovery Communications, Gamco Investors, Microsoft Corporation, Oracle Corporation, Lionsgate Entertainment Corporation. What's the lesson from that? The lesson is that there needs to be more investment in justice. There needs to be more investment in these groups, in starting new citizen groups, and planting the seeds for a more intense forest of democracy. Justice needs money. The abolition movement was funded significantly by rich Bostonians and New Yorkers. The women's suffrage movement drew on rich Philadelphians, among others. In the 1950s, the civil rights and environmental movements in the 60s drew on families such as the Stern family from Louisiana and the Curry family from Virginia. We'd like to have some enlightened, very wealthy people recognize that their legacy to America is not in their material accomplishments. Their respect for posterity is not what they bequeath to their descendants. That their legacy to America is to unfurl the civic and political energies of the American people, to turn our country into what it can be, and what it can be overseas as well. Finally, I want to conclude by urging all of you to spread the word. By your appearance today and watching it on live stream, you have pre-selected yourselves in terms of interest and commitment, reflecting your own civic energies. It's important for us to have a resurgence of civic activism. After years of powerful corporate forces turning Washington, D.C. into corporate-occupied territory and throwing so many of the citizen groups on the defensive. It's important for you to spread the word, not just in the following days here, on day 2, breaking through the media. Day 3, breaking through war, waging peace over waging war. Peace is powerful, war is weak. And day 4 on Thursday, May 26th, breaking through Congress, the single most important branch of government by far, and the one that only has 535 men and women who put their shoes on like you and I do every day, but who have to understand that their power comes from we the people, the preamble to our Constitution, which does not read we the corporations or we the Congress. It reads we the people. Turning that institution around with less than 1% organized back home, reflecting public sentiment and long overdue changes in our country and its impact on the world, will revolutionize the aspirations for the urgent development of a deep democracy. Thank you. I'll turn you over to Jim Hightower.